Thanks. So this is a joint work with Maryam Bahrani. And so let me start with what's a prequel to where the talk is going, and then I'll tell you what the result is. So over the last maybe 10 or so years, I think in addition to the classical security view, people have started looking at blockchain through a mechanism design view, which basically says the following, that blockchain protocols induce games, and that you might expect that any participant in this game will try to strategically optimize their payoff. And so some of the attacks considered, I'll give you, selfish mining will be the focus of this talk, but there are others such as timestamp or seed manipulation. And these are attacks that I think I would summarize as not directly affecting users of blockchains, but just resulting in some miners or stakers or whatever getting more rewards compared to others. And so a representative goal in this view, which I've been kind of like dedicating much of my blockchain time to, is understanding when it's the case such that as long as each player has less than some percentage of the power in the network, it's a Nash equilibrium for everyone to follow the proposed protocol. And so what's been happening since this seminal paper of Eyal and Sierra that introduced this one called selfish mining that I'll briefly overview throughout the talk, is that many protocols in practice that are deployed live with billions of dollars are not in equilibrium to follow. So for example, there was a detection of a really cool attack on Ethereum. I'll very quickly mention that, that was launched. But aside from that, there's a lot of things that theoretically, like I could tell you how to manipulate Algorand. I could tell you how to manipulate Ethereum proof of stake, like right now. And for the most part, nobody's doing it. Okay, so again, so the theory is, I don't know if I want to say it's predicting, but it's definitely alerting that there are things people could do in practice. It's not, because the models are too stylized that really people could do this. And like I said, in practice, overwhelmingly, this is not being detected. Okay, and I mentioned there's one lone exception that I think is very cool, and I love just kind of talking about that I'm very happy to do offline. The one caveat I like to give is I'm not positive how hard people are looking. But I'm pretty positive that very little, if anything, is detected. Okay, so that's kind of like the prequel to this is that, I started thinking about this when I was spending the summer at A16Z and talking to people in practice and trying to understand, first, is this actually the case that it's not detected? And I learned, yes, it's overwhelmingly the case it's not detected. And then second, actually started talking about, why might that be? And so there's a lot of different reasons that I'm also happy that I learned that I'm happy to get into offline. But just to confirm kind of a summary is that these protocols are permissionless. So that means that certainly, especially if it's an attack that you can do while being a very small person, you don't, if you buy into the permissionlessness, then it's not like someone's going to come to your door and say, you did this deviation, I don't like you, I'm going to punish you. So that's not the issue. And it is the case that, again, some of these attacks you could go buy and be a very small Ethereum staker, and you could do this attack. And on alt, so you need a ton of Bitcoin hash rate to do it on Bitcoin, but on altcoins, people have had enough hash power to do it and haven't done it. So I really want to confirm, it's not that the theory models are too stylized. You really could do this and people are really not doing it. And the most convincing argument that I heard, and by this I mean convincing in that it makes sense both for right now, and I could imagine it, still being true 5 years from now or 10 years from now, that it's not just about the current state of things, is that all of these deviations, so the one thing I would say maybe the theory misses, is that all the deviations are profitable when you denote it in the underlying cryptocurrency. So what I mean by that is selfish mining says, if you selfish mine, you will get more Bitcoin. These attacks on Ethereum say if you do this, you will get more Ether. And one thing that's true about all of these previous deviations is while they're not necessarily traceable, they're all detectable. What I mean by that, and I'll show you an example for selfish mining, is that if someone were to do these attacks, it would be very clear that someone is doing something that's not following the protocol. It would not be clear who. Even when you see it happening, you would not know which of these conflicting blocks is malicious versus not malicious. But you could definitely tell that there's something funny is going on. And so what you might be concerned about is that, yes, you selfish mine, you got, a 0.1% more Bitcoin. That's exciting. And then you also tank the exchange rate of Bitcoin. And then when you try and get your USD for it, all of a sudden it turned out to be not so good of an idea. So all of this is just a prequel to like motivate, like, why do we start looking at this? And so the technical question we wanted to ask is it possible to strictly profit by deviating in some kind of undetectable manner? So what undetectable means, I'm going to have to give you a mathematical definition later, but what I'm really trying to get at is it possible to strictly profit in crypto on some of these protocols in a way that does not run the risk of plausibly tanking the exchange rate because it looks like things are operating as normal to anyone on the outside? So that's the motivating question. And so the technical result is that yes, for the longest chain protocol that's used by Bitcoin and some of the Bitcoin clones, there is a selfish mining variant that is strictly profitable and undetectable. So this is the second bullet is informal, but the first bullet is fairly straightforward. It's saying just like all the classical manipulations, you can use this strategy and you will produce more than your honest fraction of blocks in the longest chain. So that will get you strictly more profit. What the second bullet is saying is that when you do this to an onlooker, it will look like things are operating as normal. If you were to compare it to the ground truth, which they don't know, it would look like there's just a little bit more natural latency. And so if your null hypothesis is that there is some latency, but I can't tell you exactly how much latency there is in the world, then this would look like a totally normal situation. Okay, and then also you can make this slightly increased latency arbitrarily close to zero. You're going to lower your profit as you try and make the latency look closer and closer to whatever the ground truth actually is. But basically, I would argue that for like the main way that I would try and detect selfish mining, you could do this in an undetectable manner. Okay, so what am I going to do in the rest of the talk? So I think I may go more quickly through overviewing selfish mining just because I recognize a higher fraction of blockchain nerds in the audience. But I will at minimum try to overview the results in formal statement, maybe some technical insight. But if nothing else, the main thing I wanted to get across was kind of like this agenda of thinking through like, I think it's good to take this critique of theory seriously, that like it is missing something by thinking about whether it's detectable or not. And it's good to take that seriously, but it is possible to take that seriously and do the same kind of math that we were doing before. Okay, so very quick so I am going to rush through this a bit. So just very quick reminder, what is the game induced by Bitcoin? I would say the game is the following. Every now and then you have hash rate that causes you to create a block. What do? You choose where to point, you choose when to broadcast. What does the longest chain protocol ask you to do? It says, please point to the longest chain. That's the red thing in this picture. What are the rewards? The rewards are the fraction of blocks that you wind up creating in the longest chain. So just to quickly confirm, in this picture, the blocks D and A produce no reward at the bottom, and the 4 at the top produce each 1/4. Okay, and so the key question is, when is it a Nash equilibrium for people to follow this protocol? So what Eyal and Shira showed is that they have a strategy such that if you have at least a third of the computational power in the network and everyone else is following longest chain, it is not a best response for you to do so as well. I think I will, so this is the text of their strategy. If you haven't seen it before, I'm going to very quickly just show you what it does in pictures. So imagine the game evolves like this. Someone who's following the longest chain protocol produces a block. You, the strategic player, find a block. What this means is you do not immediately broadcast it. And what you do is you do these quick 2 checks. You say, first, is there another block created by someone else of the same distance to the root? The answer is no. In this case, you have the unique longest block. Or is your block pivotal? Does it point to something that is competing with another block and you don't have something pointing to this? The answer in this case is also no. It's not pointing to a block that is competing with something else. So you would keep it hidden. If you find another block, you would go through these same 2 tests. It is not pointing, there is no competing block, and it is not pointing to a competing block. And same thing for if you were to find another block. Now, if the rest of the network, who is being honest, finds a block, they will immediately broadcast it. They will have to point to something that's already been broadcast, which does not include your hidden blocks. And now this first block satisfies condition 1. There is a competing block, so you'll immediately broadcast it. If they find another one, your second block now has a competitor, so you will immediately broadcast it. And now, as soon as this happens, the third block satisfies condition 2. It points to a block with a competitor, and you do not have anything pointing to it. So you should broadcast this as well. So very brief intuition for this is just that by the time you get to the third block, you're very nervous about not being the eventual longest chain. So you should really just broadcast and cement that. Okay. So that is the strategy. And I think I'm going to skip through this again. So I'm just trying to iterate through what are other ways this could play out. So this is another way it could play out, which is the moment you find that second block, it's immediately pivotal because it's pointing to something in competition. So that's a case where you would broadcast immediately. And then this is the only bad case that might happen is maybe you find a block and you hide it and you don't find either of the next two, and then you would actually lose this block. Okay, so that's a very brief overview of selfish mining. What I want to do is quickly talk about detecting selfish mining. So what looks weird about this picture? So the first thing you might think is, well, it looks weird because this, all right, you might say it looks weird because there's like forks and there's competition, and that you might think that shouldn't have happened because why would the creators of either of these blocks have not pointed to the longest chain? That someone didn't do that, and that's why there's multiple blocks of the same height. And I would say that's not that weird. That happens sometimes, that these blocks are found according to a random process, independent random processes. Those independent random processes sometimes will tick very close together. And when that happens, right, and when that happens, the two blocks that wound up being in conflict, they just didn't know about each other. This is a normal thing. It actually, my understanding is it happens very infrequently in Bitcoin, but it does happen. What I would say is weird about this picture is the pattern of conflicts. So if someone is selfish mining, conditioned on there being a conflict the first time, you are much more likely to have a conflict at the height immediately following it. So what that means is that the pattern of conflicts you will see is much more likely to have longer chains of conflicts than if it was an independent process. Okay, now if it was really an independent process and all orphans were caused by like, oh, there's like two Poisson processes and they happen to tick at the same time, the fact that they happen to tick at the same time right now does not make them any more likely to tick at the same time the next time something ticks. Okay, so that's what I want to get across is that this is, I think, the easy to detect way that something funny is going on if someone is selfish mining. Okay, so I did go through that. I'm until 9. Great. Okay, so I did leave myself enough time to say something something technical. Okay, so let me state the model. For simplicity, especially since I'm just running through it, I want to imagine one selfish miner and the rest of the network is honest. I'll model them as a single player. And so what happens is every round, one or both players find a block independently of all previous rounds. What this means is that every round, there's these two independent Poisson processes. They may tick very close together, which would cause a conflict, or they may tick separately, and then whoever's first would find a block. Okay, so it's with these probabilities. So now what would happen is that if both players are honest and follow the longest chain protocol, then each height would have an orphan independently with probability B. That's just because the only way you get an orphan is if the two processes tick very close together. This happens independently in every round. Okay, so now I can get into a formal definition of what does undetectable mean. So a strategy for the attacker is strictly profitable if they have a greater than honest fraction of the longest chain. So that's the same definition as all the prior work. Undetectable if the pattern of orphans that result from them using this strategy is such that each height has an orphan independently with some probability, not necessarily exactly the same as the ground truth. So what this is saying is that my null hypothesis is that there is some ground latency and that conflicts happen independently. But I'm saying as a ground truth observer, I do not necessarily know exactly what the fraction of conflicts should be. And then putting both of these together, I'll say that a certain amount of hash rate enables strictly profitable undetectable deviations if there is a strictly profitable undetectable strategy that induces a latency arbitrarily close to ground truth. So for example, I might not have a good sense of what the ground truth latency is, but maybe I would be suspicious if it appeared as though it took 17 seconds to broadcast stuff across the internet. Whereas I'm here talking about like, well, if I think the ground truth is somewhere between a half second and 1 second, I'm probably not going to be super surprised if it's 0.76 instead of 0.75. Okay, so now the theorem is basically just that if you have at least this fraction, then there is a strictly profitable undetectable deviation. And I'll just note this is more than 1/3, which is what you would need to use the classical selfish mining attack. I would maybe try and say it's not that much more than 1/3. Okay, let me go ahead and very quickly try and give this a shot. So, okay, so you said what's one problem that might happen is if you succeeded in selfish mining, you are really likely to have an orphan at height 2, given that you had an orphan at height 1, right? So that's because if you were successful, you are going to create a long chain of orphans. All right, so that's one thing that you have to be mindful of. What happened here? So here's another thing that I might try and do is I might try and say like, hey, why don't I just like, okay, what happened here? All right, since I'm running out of time and I think I confused myself with these slides, I am just going to go to the conclusions anyway. But I do have some slides that I could probably walk through offline and get you through some of the technical stuff if you wanted. So, all right, wrapping up. The motivation for this was that in theory, we've seen lots of examples that say for protocols that are live right now, there are things someone could do to strictly profit by deviating, and overwhelmingly no one is doing this. There are more reasons than just the one I shared. My take from what I've heard is that a lot of those are maybe unique to the situation right now, and those I think could change on the 5-year horizon. The one that I think is more fundamental is about having something being detected and having that possibly tank the value. I should maybe also caveat that I don't know if an attack were to be detected, whether or not it would tank the value. I think there are arguments that suggest that actually everything would be fine anyway. But I do think that this is a good fundamental concern to be. And so our main result was showing that actually you can take, at least in the case of the seminal selfish mining attack, you can make it undetectable, which I would argue kind of sidesteps this potential criticism. Okay, and so in terms of, like future stuff, I do think I'm kind of hoping that this is kind of like maybe more of a conceptual contribution rather than like, okay, cool, another selfish mining paper, and that and people will be able to think about like taking this specific kind of criticism seriously in other domains where we're proposing deviations from protocols, and then maybe leading to stronger deviations that sidestep it, or maybe realizing that it actually is a fundamental barrier. And I think so I'll pause there, and thank you very much for listening.